Shame on you.
What did you do that for? I didn't buy them.
No, but you tried to. It's bad enough picking on a straw man, but when you go around picking on poor little dogs.
Well, you didn't have to go and hit me, did you?
Speaking of the next generation, one of the things that I find disconcerting, we do talk about it on the channel quite a bit. Like I said, I have two small children. My son's 5 years old now, and I'm teaching him to read using comic books, and there's really not a lot of it out there. Of course, there are some DC books that are really are aimed at like the kindergarten kind of age, your early first, second grade kind of thing. Canto is a good example. Actually, Super Sons from a regular DC comic, you can absolutely, I can read that with my son, and he's very engaged. But it feels like it's been lost on the industry that they need to target children as that next generation of readers, and really to keep these characters and the storytelling medium going. I know, like here in the Philippines, when you look, there are pictures from the 70s and 80s. And one of the things that they would do that was kind of part of the culture here is the older gentlemen in the neighborhood, they would go and buy comic books. And you can't really do that here because they're only in Manila now, but you would go to your local drugstore, you buy comic books, and once the older gentleman in the block had read the comics, they would lay them out on the street. There's all these pictures, and all the kids would come around from the neighborhoods, and they would all be reading them on New Comic Book Day.
That's amazing.
That's awesome.
And it's been completely lost because, the Philippines is a third world country, and comic books continue to get more and more expensive. So now it's, it's almost a luxury item. And you could, like I said, you could only get them in one city now. And I had one commenter on one of my videos. She's like a freelance colorist from Italy. And she said, like maybe 10 or 15 years ago, in Italy and I believe large parts of Europe, they kind of just went away from floppies altogether. They only released comic books in trades, and then really only for adults. And she said, the children, like the kids she knows in Italy, they don't even realize comic books exist. They think Spider-Man is a cartoon and a movie character.
Mm-hmm. That's to me, somebody mentioned this a while back, and I totally agree with it, which is you have these major blockbuster movies based on comic books. Why isn't Marvel and DC and Image and all of these other major publishers putting out a 12-pager that's just a giveaway at theater? You can pick it up on the table, and it's like, oh, did you like Spider-Man Far From Home? Well, here's a 12-page story that is the inspiration for it, or a spin-off of it, or just tying, exposing kids to what the source material is, because now they're watching these movies and they're going to the comic book store and saying, oh, cool, they made a comic book based on the movie.
Right.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy because, a Spider-Man movie is only going to come out every 1 or 2 years, and you might see him in the Avengers movie if it comes out, in the meantime. But there's big gaps that are in there where people would be willing to seek these things out. And I think a lot of them don't realize they exist. Or, if you go on into a comic book shop, and, I didn't start reading comics till I was in my 30s. So I felt this as an adult. It was a bit overwhelming when you're like, okay, I want a Batman comic. And you go look and you're like,
uh-oh.
There's 6 of them. Okay, which, I imagine Batman's the one I'm supposed to be reading, but we got Detective Comics. Wait, I've definitely heard of that one. And then, or if you go for Spider-Man, wait, there's Amazing Spider-Man, there's Ultimate Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man.
Friendly Neighborhood.
Yeah, and it can be a bit overwhelming, but I agree with you. There should be some type of gateway that gets kids, into that local comic shop, probably with the store locator in the back, but also like an advertisement that says this story continues here. That way, when you go in there and you're like, hey, here's Mr. Comic Shop guy, I want the rest of this story.
Right.
It tells me that I'm supposed to pick up this other comic book that picks this up. But it feels like there's not a lot of effort as far as marketing to really make comic books, a focal point, for people to be reading in the meantime of the movies.
So the industry has this major problem when it comes to this kind of stuff. because they've never been able to get everyone on the same page when it comes to this. And it also kind of comes down to you only have so many hours in a day. And if you look at something like Marvel, those guys are so just keeping their head above water in terms of what they need to do to hit their monthly deadlines of what they're doing. But then the trade-off becomes, well, then you're not innovating. You're just running in place. And that's sort of what happens, is that everyone is kind of continually run in place, but then bitches that the industry isn't profitable. And it kind of, this whole pandemic has shown a pretty bright light on how overall weak the industry is and how fragile it actually is. And a lot of that is over years and years of not taking advantage of these kinds of things, of not doing outreach beyond our own little core group that inhabits a comic shop. And I know David and I have talked about this. For both of us, Canto is our first real major success that we've had. But even by the standards of what, say, the book market does beyond comics, we are a small fish with success, but not really anything that a major book publisher wants to get out of bed for. And unfortunately, the industry has kind of remained so small that it's always going to be minor league baseball, essentially, unless it finds a way to grow itself. And I've spoken with shops about it, and I've told them I love the direct market, and the direct market is an essential part of it. But they are only part of what constitutes profitability. And until the direct market can grow beyond that and figure out how to integrate itself into being one larger and a more essential part of kind of the ecosystem that they exist in, it's just always going to be one part that is only part of the whole. It's not the essential part.
I think you look at the sales numbers for the direct market versus the book market, and I think that hardcover for House of X, Powers of X, the first month it was out, it was like 5,000 for the direct market, 5,000 copies. And I think Raina Telgemeier's Guts that just came out last year, I think her first month in the book market was 17,000.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. She was number one on the New York Times bestsellers list. But a success in the direct market for a trade is 1,000 copies. And if you sell 1,000 copies, you have to sell 1,000 copies a month for 12 months to even be considered a mid-level author in the book market.
Right.
So, in it's the book market wants these all ages, skewing younger graphic novels, and so until the comic shops can figure out a way to tap into that market, they have Guts and they have Super Sons and they have all these other things, but they also have Wes, just like you were talking about, going into the comic shop and being overwhelmed by the wall full of comics. I imagine, I'm not a parent, but imagine if I was a parent going in there and saying,
where do I even begin?
Why am I even bringing my kid in here to pick something when I can go to Barnes & Noble or the local independent bookstore, and I know that there's we've got an independent bookstore right down the street from us, and their second floor is entirely kids' books, graphic novels, YA, picture books. When you walk up those stairs, basically everything you can pick up for a 8 to 12-year-old kid, you can't go wrong.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
Can do that.
It's also a matter of the direct market is playing its own game with Diamond and Wednesday Warriors and single issues and all this other stuff. And, I'm not advocating for that stuff to go away. But the reality is that what you're dealing with is an entirely different system that the general public is not accustomed to. So they come into a comic shop and it's just, well, I've got new books on the shelf here, and then I've got graphic novels here, and I've got 30 years worth of Batman over here. And it's completely overwhelming. But like I said, also the industry has gotten into this habit of running in place, and as a result, the industry is kind of notorious for taking the path of least resistance when it comes to certain things. And to me, YA is a perfect example of it. Part of what we set out to do with Canto was reclaim all ages a little bit, where it feels like, and it's not disrespect to anyone that works on these books, but it does feel like a lot of the all ages books, the art panders to people or to kids, the writing panders to them. And every now and then you'll see something kind of break through that isn't doing that. But, you know, you get the sense from the larger entities that are hiring these people that they're just like, oh, it's just for kids. Just throw it out there. Throw it out there. And that doesn't grow the industry. That doesn't make you know, maybe you'll sell some copies to kids, but that doesn't make them want to come back.
Yeah, it's a completely different market, and I do find it funny that, you know, the comic book industry is so eager to embrace Dav Pilkey and Raina Telgemeier now, as if they're part of the industry. And well, from what I've been told, and obviously I don't know because I haven't talked to Raina herself, but I was told that she pitched her ideas to one of the traditional comic publishers, and they said that they didn't have a place for that, you know, in comic books. And she went and had to create her own, basically market. Her and Dav Pilkey have done that, and it's extremely successful. And they had to like go around the industry when they were presenting them the next great idea to bring new readers in. And
that is not uncommon.
I can tell you from personal experience that she has created that market in comics now, where every publisher, every major, at least indie publisher, from Boom, IDW, Dark Horse, Image, Skybound, I can tell you every single one of them is looking for the Raina Telgemeier version of whatever book that they can publish, not specifically style, but just the way she broke through that market. Every one of them is now actively pursuing that market to find their guts, to find their Dogman and Big Nate and you know, Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Again, different styles, but that's what they want.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and there should be a synergy. There needs to be a more distinct digital strategy. There needs to be a strategy for the direct market, and there needs to be a strategy for these more youth-oriented graphic novels that all kind of work together and synergize. You know, and in the case of, you know, AT&T and Disney, get people to the movie theaters eventually, you know, to go and watch the $1 billion movie that, you know, that's really powering all of this, unfortunately. But it doesn't really feel like that. You know, a lot of retailers are kind of scared of digital, where in fact, I would say, you know, in my experience as someone who has to read digital because there isn't a comic shop here, I have to buy a lot of my trades on Comixology. Like I talked about X-O Manowar. Guess what I own now? I own physical copies of all of those X-O Manowar volumes that I read and that were so important to me because I want them in my house and I want to give them to my sons one day because they're important stories to me now.
I thought you were going to say, guess what I own now? Comixology.
No, but I own the trades that I buy on Comixology that are important to me. I get them for very cheap on Comixology, but the experience is different. And I do want to own important books that are important to me physically. So, you know, I think digital, as Larry Comics would say, is the spinner rack for the next generation. And that needs to be, you know, because we're not getting into 7-Elevens, we're not getting back into drugstores, but you know, digital, every kid has a phone right now. A lot of kids have tablets. That should be the new gateway to get kids into comic stores. And it feels like there's not a great strategy. Although I love what Marvel has done, you know, during the pandemic, it was putting some of those high visibility, very well executed stories on their Marvel Unlimited app for free. You don't have to have a login. You don't have to give them your information, but you can go and read Dark Phoenix Saga. You can go and read you know, X-Men, Civil War. You can go read, you know, The Winter Soldier. Some really good stories. You know, Thanos Wins by Donny Cates, and those are the things that get people into comic shops.
Yeah,
sure.
I'm in the same boat. I actually read most of my books digitally, based purely on I don't have the room for it, and I am so far behind that generally I end up picking stuff up on the cheaper end because I'm like 3 years behind reading everything else. But I do go out and buy trades that are important to me, or I go out and buy my friends' trades who I want to support. I don't think if you even got books back into 7-Eleven or drugstores, I don't think it makes a difference at this point. I think that time is come and gone, and it is all it is a surface level scratching of what will fix the problem. I think I'm with you. I think digital is realistically the future because ultimately what you need is to break out of the echo chamber that is comics, and you need to get out to the rest of the world. Digital has that ability to do it, and then it has the ability to bring those people back in to kind of the physical comic ecosystem. I have my own personal gripes with the way Comixology's site operates in terms of getting that out there. And my great hope had been that we wouldn't end up in the digital equivalent of Diamond. But, I mean, here we are. But ultimately, to me, Comixology is so important to bringing people in. And, for me and David, Canto's digital numbers were nothing to necessarily write home about. The book really did succeed in comic shops, and then managed to, through a lot of work, from what we've seen, has managed to work its way out to the general public a bit more. But, we're only one book. And if you're looking at it from the whole of the industry, digital is a really important tool. And, any shop that tells you that it's stripping them of, money or of customer base, they serve two totally different masters. And that's been proven over the last 10 years.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.